It was supposed to be a celebration, the proud return of Space Shuttle Columbia after a 16-day mission in space. Families were waiting, cameras were rolling, and the world was ready to welcome the astronauts home. But within seconds, that joy turned into horror. The shuttle broke apart high above the Earth, scattering across the sky like falling stars. What most people don't know is that the Columbia disaster was far more tragic, far more complex, and far more preventable than we were ever told. The world watched in disbelief as streaks of fire crossed the Texas sky that February morning in 2003. News anchors spoke in hushed voices, unsure how to explain what they were seeing. NASA quickly confirmed the worst: the shuttle had disintegrated upon re-entry. But behind the official reports, hidden inside documents and witness testimonies, lay a story filled with warnings that were ignored, dangers that were known, and heartbreak that could have been avoided. Before the shuttle even launched, engineers had raised concerns. They feared that a piece of foam from the external fuel tank might break off during takeoff, something that had happened before. That foam, though light, could hit the shuttle at incredible speeds. When Columbia launched on January 16, 2003, a large chunk of that foam did break away and slammed into the left wing. The impact was caught on camera. Some engineers were alarmed, but others dismissed it as minor damage. That moment sealed the fate of 7 brave astronauts. In space, the crew of Columbia had no idea anything was wrong. They carried out their experiments, took photos of Earth, and spoke to students back home. Their laughter and smiles were broadcast to millions. They believed they would soon be back with their families. But hundreds of miles below them, NASA teams were quietly debating the foam strike, unsure if it had caused serious harm. Some engineers even begged for satellite images of the shuttle's wing, but those requests were denied. When Columbia began its return to Earth on February 1st, everything seemed normal. The crew prepared for landing, their voices calm and focused. Commander Rick Husband and pilot William McCool followed every procedure perfectly. But as the shuttle hit the upper atmosphere, heat began seeping into the damaged wing. Temperatures rose rapidly, sensors started failing, and then silence. The next few minutes were chaos. Controllers on the ground tried to reach the crew, but there was no response. The shuttle's data feed showed massive system failures. And then the radar signal vanished. The people in NASA's control room knew instantly what that meant. Columbia was gone. The 7 astronauts, heroes who had spent their lives reaching for the stars, were lost. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking recoveries in NASA's history. Thousands of people across Texas and Louisiana began finding pieces of the shuttle scattered across fields, forests, and towns. Entire communities joined together to collect debris with tears in their eyes. Among those pieces were fragments of the astronauts' personal belongings, reminders of lives cut short far too soon. The investigation that followed uncovered shocking truths. The foam strike had indeed caused a hole in the shuttle's left wing, allowing superheated gas to enter and tear the spacecraft apart from within. But the most painful discovery was that some NASA officials had underestimated the risk. Meetings were held. Concerns were voiced. Yet no one made the final decision to inspect the damage properly. The system had failed not because of one mistake, but because of a chain of ignored warnings. And while the media showed only part of the tragedy, the real story behind the scenes was filled with heartbreak and regret. Engineers who had begged for attention were left haunted by guilt. Families of the astronauts learned that the disaster might have been prevented. And NASA itself faced a harsh truth, that confidence and routine had blinded them to danger. Even today, the story of Columbia is not just about a spacecraft that broke apart. It's about human error, overlooked warnings, and the heavy price of progress. The Columbia disaster was indeed just a failure of technology. It was a reminder that even the smallest detail in space, exploration can decide between life and death. In the days following the tragedy, NASA's mood turned from shock to deep reflection. The once busy control rooms were silent, monitors were dark, coffee cups left untouched. Engineers who had worked on Columbia for years sat quietly, replaying every moment, every decision, every warning they might have missed. They realized that this wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a human one. A failure of communication, of responsibility, and of trust. The families of the 7 astronauts, Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, Elon Ramon, Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, and Laurel Clark, stood as symbols of courage. Their strength in the face of unthinkable loss inspired millions. Each astronaut had a dream, a story, and a message. Kalpana Chawla, for example, had become a global icon, especially in India, where she inspired a whole generation to look toward the stars. Elon Ramon, Israel's first astronaut, had carried with him the dreams of an entire nation. As investigators pieced together what happened, a disturbing pattern emerged. The foam shedding problem wasn't new. It had happened on multiple shuttle flights before, but it was always dismissed because it hadn't caused disaster yet. NASA had fallen into a dangerous mindset known as normalization of deviance, when something risky becomes accepted simply because nothing bad has happened so far. That same mindset had also played a role in the Challenger disaster years earlier. History, it seemed, had repeated itself. Behind closed doors, engineers spoke openly for the first time about the fear and frustration they had felt during the mission. One engineer revealed that he couldn't sleep the night Columbia launched. He knew the foam strike was serious, but no one wanted to delay the mission. Another said he had requested satellite imaging from the Department of Defense, which could have shown the damage clearly. But the request never reached approval. These were not villains. They were people trapped inside a flawed system. Meanwhile, debris recovery continued across thousands of square miles. Volunteers, police, and military worked day and night. They found thousands of pieces, carefully tagged and transported for analysis. Every small piece helped tell the story of what went wrong. And in that painful process, humanity saw the true spirit of unity, people coming together, not for fame, but for truth. When NASA finally presented its official report months later, the findings were devastating. The foam strike during launch had caused a hole the size of a briefcase in the shuttle S-wing. During re-entry, superheated air at over 1,400 degrees Celsius entered through that hole, melting the internal structure. The shuttle was doomed long before it reached home, the saddest part. Experts later concluded that if NASA had known the full extent of the damage in time, a rescue mission from the International Space Station might have been possible. That what-if still haunts many to this day. What if someone had pushed harder for imaging? What if the damage had been taken seriously? What if they had tried to send another shuttle to rescue them? The questions remain, echoing through NASA's halls even now. The Columbia disaster forced NASA to make massive changes. The entire space shuttle program was grounded for more than 2 years. Safety systems were rebuilt, procedures rewritten, and every foam-related issue was re-engineered. It was the agency's most painful lesson, and one that changed spaceflight forever. But for those who lost loved ones, no redesign could erase the pain. Now the families became advocates for safety and accountability, speaking to new generations of astronauts and engineers. They wanted to make sure that their loss would never be in vain, that no one else would ever pay the price for silence or complacency again. And yet, there's another layer to this tragedy, one that few talk about. The recordings from Columbia's final minutes, recovered from the onboard data, showed calm professionalism until the very end. Even as systems failed and alarms sounded, the astronauts did exactly what they were trained to do. They stayed focused, brave, and strong. Their final words weren't of fear, but of duty. When the world finally heard those last transmissions, it broke hearts everywhere. The voices of Commander Rick Husband and pilot William McCool remained calm, trying to regain control as the shuttle tore apart around them. There was no panic, no chaos, just trained astronauts doing everything they could to bring Columbia home. That courage, even in the face of certain death, became a lasting symbol of humanity's spirit to explore, no matter the cost. NASA later released a memorial video showing moments from the crew's final days in orbit. They were smiling, floating weightlessly, talking about the beauty of Earth. In one clip, Kalpana Chawla gazed out at the blue planet and said softly, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Watching those moments later, knowing what would happen, left millions in tears. These weren't just astronauts, they were dreamers, scientists, and heroes who carried the hopes of all humankind. In the aftermath, NASA built the Columbia Memorial to honor the fallen crew, but they also turned the pain into purpose. Every new mission after that carried lessons learned from Columbia. Engineers double-checked every inch of hardware. Communication was encouraged at all levels. If you see something wrong, speak up, no matter who you are, became a golden rule at NASA. The loss reshaped the culture of space exploration forever. Outside NASA, the public began asking bigger questions. How safe is space travel really? How much risk is acceptable in the pursuit of discovery? And perhaps the hardest one, how many more lives will we lose before we finally learn? These were not easy questions, but they were necessary ones. The Columbia disaster forced humanity to face the uncomfortable truth. Progress often walks hand in hand with danger, and even amid the sorrow, something beautiful happened. People all over the world began celebrating the crew's lives, rather than just mourning their deaths. Schools were named after them. Scholarships were created in their honor. Their stories inspired new generations to study science, to dream big, and to reach for the stars. Columbia's crew didn't just die. They ignited a fire in the hearts of millions. Years later, when NASA finally returned to flight with the shuttle Discovery in 2005, it was more than just a mission. It was a tribute. As the engines roared and the shuttle lifted off, the names of the Columbia 7 were read aloud. Many in mission control cried silently. They knew that every life lost had made this moment safer, stronger, and wiser. But even now, the shadow of Columbia lingers. Every new space project, from Artemis to SpaceX launches, carries the lessons written in fire across that Texas sky. The engineers who lived through that day still say that Columbia changed the way they think about space forever. "We learned the hard way," one NASA veteran said. But we learned, documentaries, interviews, and recovered data continued to reveal new insights about that tragic day. Not just about the technical failures, but about the human side, the bravery, the silence, the heartbreak, and the resilience. Because behind every mission, there are families waiting, people believing, and hearts hoping for a safe return. The Columbia disaster wasn't just the end of a mission. It was a turning point for all of space exploration. It showed the world that space, as beautiful as it is also unforgiving. Every launch is a leap of faith, and every astronaut who climbs aboard does so knowing the risks. That kind of courage deserves to be remembered forever. So when you look up at the night sky, think of the Columbia crew. Think of the 7 souls who flew higher than most ever will and paid the ultimate price for discovery. They didn't just touch the stars, they became a part of them. And their story reminds us all that the journey to the unknown will always come with sacrifice. But it's that very sacrifice that pushes humanity forward.